My name is Maya Whitaker. I'm 25 years old now, but when I was 16, my mother packed my clothes into 2 trash bags, drove me away from our quiet suburban life outside Cleveland, Ohio, and left me on my grandfather's porch like I was a problem she had finally solved. She didn't say I needed help. She didn't say she was scared. She didn't even say goodbye like a mother should. She told him she was done raising a crazy girl, then got back in her car and drove away, while I stood there crying with my whole life sitting at my feet. The strange part is, I really did have medical issues. I had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder when I was 9 and severe ADHD when I was 11. But in my house, those words never meant treatment, patience, or understanding. They became weapons. Every manic episode was called an embarrassment. Every depressive episode was called laziness. Every time I struggled, my mother acted like I had chosen to make her life harder. And while my brother was treated like the golden child who could do no wrong, I was the daughter everyone whispered about. The one who made family dinners tense, the one who ruined pictures, the one my mother said made the whole house feel insane. For years, I believed her. Then, almost a decade later, after I had rebuilt my life, after the man she abandoned me to become the only real parent I ever had, she showed up at my door begging me to save the son she had always chosen over me. And when she said, "Please, save your brother," I smiled and told her, "This crazy person doesn't understand what you're talking about." Before I tell you what she did next, and why that one sentence shattered the perfect family story she had been selling for years, tell me this: what time is it where you are right now, and where are you watching from? I want to know how far this story travels before the truth catches up with her. I grew up in a clean, quiet suburb outside Cleveland, Ohio, the kind of place where every house had a trimmed lawn, every driveway had a basketball hoop, and every family tried to look perfect from the sidewalk. My mother, Denise Whitaker, cared more about that sidewalk view than anything happening inside our home. She wanted neighbors to see a smiling family at block parties, matching sweaters in Christmas photos, and a son in a football jersey standing proudly beside her. What she did not want was a daughter whose brain did not work the way she expected. When I was 9, a doctor told my parents I had bipolar disorder. I did not understand what that meant at the time. I only knew that sometimes my thoughts moved so fast I could not sleep, could not stop talking, could not stop making plans that felt brilliant at 2 in the morning. Other times, I felt like my body had been filled with wet cement, and getting out of bed felt like trying to lift a car with my bare hands. When I was 11, another doctor added severe ADHD to the list, which explained why school felt like sitting in a room full of radios all playing different stations at once. I needed help. I needed patience. I needed a mother who would sit down with doctors, ask questions, learn my patterns, and help me understand myself. Instead, my mother treated the words on those medical papers like a stain on her reputation. She did not say bipolar disorder. She said mood problem. She did not say ADHD. She said lazy and dramatic. And when things got hard, she used one word more than any other: crazy. If I talked too fast, I was crazy. If I cried too hard, I was crazy. If I forgot homework, lost my phone, interrupted dinner, snapped at someone, slept all afternoon, or got excited about a project, and covered the dining room table in sketches and markers, I was crazy. My brother Brandon was 3 years older than me, and everything my mother wanted in a child. He was tall, charming, athletic, polite to adults, and good at saying the right thing at the right time. By high school, he was a football star, and my mother acted like his jersey number was a family achievement. She posted every touchdown on Facebook. She put newspaper clippings on the refrigerator. She drove him to practice, bought him new cleats, and made sure everyone at church knew he had scouts watching him. When I needed therapy, she said it was too expensive. When Brandon needed a private trainer, she found the money by Friday. My father, Mark, was not cruel in the loud way my mother was, but he was weak in the quiet way that sometimes hurts just as much. He would lower his eyes when she called me crazy. He would sigh when I asked for help. He would say, "Maya, try not to upset your mother," as if my symptoms were something I was doing to her on purpose. Family gatherings were the worst. My mother would talk about Brandon like he was already headed to the NFL, then glance at me and say things like, "Maya has been a little difficult lately," or, "You know how she gets." Everyone would laugh awkwardly, and I would sit there with my hands under the table, digging my nails into my palms because I knew if I reacted, I would prove her right. She had a way of turning every struggle I had into evidence against me. If I was quiet, I was being rude. If I spoke up, I was being unstable. If I did well in school, she said the teachers were being generous because they felt bad for me. If I failed, she said I was wasting everyone's time. The older I got, the angrier I became. But underneath the anger was something much more painful. I wanted her to love me. I wanted her to look at me just once the way she looked at Brandon after a game, like I had made her proud simply by existing. Instead, I became the problem child, the whispered warning, the girl people treated like a storm cloud walking into the room. By the time I was 15, I had started believing the stories she told about me. Maybe I really was too much. Maybe I really did ruin everything. Maybe the only way to survive in that house was to stop expecting anyone to understand me. The night everything exploded was my sophomore homecoming dance. I remember it clearly because I had spent weeks convincing myself that if I could just get through one normal high school night, maybe I could prove I was not the disaster my mother thought I was. I bought a simple blue dress with money I had saved from babysitting a neighbor's kids. I straightened my hair in the bathroom while my mother stood in the hallway and reminded me not to embarrass the family. She did not ask if I was nervous. She did not ask if I had been sleeping. She did not notice that for almost 4 nights, I had barely rested at all. My mind had been racing, jumping from one idea to another, buzzing so loudly I could hardly hear myself think. I felt electric and fragile at the same time, like one wrong word could make me shatter. Looking back, I know I was sliding into a manic episode, but back then, nobody in my house cared enough to help me see the signs. My mother only cared that Brandon had a game the next morning and that nothing I did could distract from him. Before I left, she said, "Just be normal for one night, Maya." That sentence followed me into the school gym like a curse. The music was too loud. The lights were flashing. People were laughing, shouting, taking pictures, spinning around in dresses and button-down shirts. For a while, I tried. I really tried. I smiled when people smiled at me. I stood near a group of girls from my English class and pretended I was not overwhelmed by every sound in the room. Then a boy from my history class looked at me and whispered something to his friend. I only caught a few words, but they were enough. Crazy girl. Maybe they had heard it from their parents. Maybe they had heard it from Brandon's friends. Maybe my mother had said it so many times that the whole suburb had learned to repeat it. My chest tightened. My face got hot. I told myself to walk away, but my thoughts were moving too fast, and the room felt like it was shrinking around me. Someone laughed. Someone else said my name. A teacher asked if I was okay, and instead of answering, I snapped. I shouted at the boys to stop talking about me. I knocked into a table covered in decorations, and a glass centerpiece hit the floor. A banner came loose when I grabbed it to steady myself. People backed away. A teacher tried to calm me down, but every voice sounded like an accusation. I was crying and yelling at the same time, not because I wanted to scare anyone, but because I felt trapped inside my own body. The school resource officer came in, then the principal. Then someone called my mother. I remember standing outside the gym under those bright hallway lights, shaking so hard my knees hurt, while students peeked through the doors like I was a scene from a movie. When my mother arrived, she did not run to me. She did not ask the officer if I was safe. She looked at the broken decorations, the worried staff, the staring students, and her face twisted with humiliation. Then she said the words loudly enough for everyone to hear. "She is crazy. I cannot do this anymore." I stopped crying for 1 second because something inside me went completely still. It was one thing to hear that word at home. It was another thing to hear my mother throw it across a school hallway, like she wanted it to stick to my skin forever. The ride home was silent until we pulled into the driveway. Then she exploded. She said I had ruined her reputation. She said Brandon would hear about this at school. She said every parent in town would know she had a daughter who could not behave herself. I tried to explain that I had not been sleeping, that I felt out of control, that I did not mean to make a scene. But she cut me off and said, "I regret having you. You have been nothing but a burden to this family." My father stood in the kitchen and said nothing. Brandon came halfway down the stairs, saw my face, then went back up like none of it had anything to do with him. My mother took my phone, my laptop, and even the little sketchbook I carried everywhere. She told me I was grounded until she decided what to do with me. For 2 days, I stayed in my room except for bathroom breaks. She brought food upstairs and left it outside my door like she was feeding something dangerous. I heard her on the phone telling relatives that I had gone completely out of control. I heard her tell my father that I was going to destroy Brandon's future if they did not get me away from the family. Nobody came in to sit beside me. Nobody said, "Maya, this was scary, but we are going to get you help." On the second night, I lay on the floor beside my bed and stared at the ceiling, wondering how a girl could live in a house full of people and still feel completely abandoned. The next morning, my mother opened the door and threw a suitcase onto my bed. "Pack what you need," she said. "You are leaving." I thought she meant I was being sent to a hospital, or maybe some strict program she had found online after one angry phone call. Part of me was terrified, but another part of me almost hoped there would be doctors there, people who would look at me and see something other than a bad daughter. Instead, my mother stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and told me to pack clothes for more than a few days. She did not help me fold anything. She did not soften when she saw my hands shaking. She just watched me shove jeans, shirts, socks, and a few personal things into a suitcase and 2 black trash bags. When I reached for my sketchbook, she said, "You will not need that." I took it anyway when she turned around. It was the only thing in that room that felt like mine. My father was in the kitchen drinking coffee when I came downstairs. He looked tired, but not surprised. That hurt almost more than my mother's anger. It meant they had discussed this without me. It meant everyone knew I was being removed from my own home except me. Brandon did not even come downstairs. I heard his bedroom door close, and that was his goodbye. My mother loaded my things into the trunk, told me to get in the car, and started driving south. For the first 20 minutes, I kept asking where we were going. She ignored me. Then I saw signs for Columbus and my stomach dropped. My grandfather lived there, my father's father, a quiet widower named Ellis Whitaker. I loved him, but I did not know him well enough to understand why we were going to his house with all my clothes. The drive from Cleveland to Columbus felt endless. The highway blurred past my window, gray and flat under the Ohio sky. My mother kept both hands on the wheel and did not say a word until we pulled onto my grandfather's street. His house was small and old, with a narrow porch, a cracked walkway, and a mailbox that leaned slightly to one side. It looked peaceful, but I felt like I was arriving at a place where someone else had already decided my future. Grandpa opened the door before we even reached the porch. He looked confused when he saw the suitcase. Then he saw my face. My mother did not hug him. She did not explain gently. She dragged my suitcase up the steps, dropped the trash bags beside it, and said, "She is out of control. I cannot raise a crazy girl anymore." Grandpa looked at her like she had slapped him. I started crying before I could stop myself. I begged my mother not to leave me there. I told her I would do better. I told her I would apologize to the school, to Brandon, to everyone. I promised I would be quiet, normal, invisible, anything she wanted. She looked down at me with a kind of cold exhaustion that I can still see in my nightmares. "You wanted attention," she said. "Now you have it." Then she turned around and walked back to the car. I ran after her as far as the driveway, but Grandpa caught my arm gently, not to hold me back like a prisoner, but to keep me from collapsing in the street. My mother got in, shut the door, and drove away without looking in the rearview mirror. For a minute, all I could do was stand there. My whole childhood had fit into one suitcase and two trash bags. My mother had not just dropped me off, she had returned me like something defective. Grandpa did not speak right away. He let me cry until I had no breath left. Then he picked up one trash bag, carried it inside, came back for the second, and finally took my suitcase. When I whispered that I was sorry, he set the suitcase down in the hallway and turned toward me with tears in his eyes. "You do not apologize for being left behind, kiddo," he said. "Not in this house." That was the first time in years an adult had spoken to me like I was a person instead of a problem. That night, Grandpa made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup because he said nobody should make big decisions on an empty stomach. He admitted he was scared. He was in his late 60s, widowed, living on a fixed income, and he had not expected to raise a teenager. But then he told me something that changed everything. "Your father called me after that school incident," he said. "Your mother wanted me to take you because she said she was done. I told them I needed to think about it. Then I found out they had locked you in your room for 2 days. After that, there was nothing left to think about." The next morning, he started making calls. He called the school district in Columbus. He called a family lawyer about temporary guardianship. He called my old doctor's office to request records. He did more for me in one morning than my mother had done in years. I still felt broken. I still felt unwanted. But for the first time, I was in a house where someone looked at my diagnosis and saw a responsibility to help, not an excuse to throw me away. Grandpa did not magically fix me, and I think that is important. Love did not erase bipolar disorder. A warm house did not make severe ADHD disappear. I still had hard days. I still had nights when my thoughts raced so fast I had to sit on the kitchen floor and press my palms against the tile just to remind myself where I was. I still had mornings when depression wrapped around me so tightly that brushing my teeth felt like climbing a mountain. But the difference was that Grandpa never treated those moments like proof that I was crazy. He treated them like signs that we needed a plan. He found a psychiatrist in Columbus who actually listened to me. He sat in the waiting room with a paperback novel every appointment and never complained about the drive. He helped me get on a medication routine and bought one of those weekly pill organizers from CVS because he said memory should not have to carry everything alone. He helped me make a sleep schedule, not in a controlling way, but in a steady way. If I stayed up too late, he would knock on my door and say, "Brain needs rest, kiddo. The world will still be there tomorrow." He found a therapist, Ms. Porter, who taught me words I had never heard in my own home, like triggers, regulation, boundaries, and self-compassion. At first, I hated therapy because it made me feel exposed. I was used to defending myself. I was used to every adult deciding who I was before I opened my mouth. But Ms. Porter did not flinch when I told the truth. She helped me understand that what happened at homecoming was serious, but it was not the whole story of me. She helped me see how long I had been taught to hate the parts of myself that needed care. Grandpa changed my school too. He met with counselors, explained my diagnoses without shame, and asked what support I qualified for. My mother had always used my medical issues as a reason to lower expectations. Grandpa used them as a reason to build better support. That difference saved me. I started catching up in classes. I learned how to use planners, alarms, color-coded notes, and quiet study rooms. I still lost assignments sometimes, still forgot things, still had emotional crashes, but now mistakes were not treated like moral failures. They were problems to solve. Slowly, I stopped acting like a girl who expected to be thrown away again. Grandpa also gave me back my sketchbook. He noticed that when I drew, I could focus longer than usual. He bought me used design books from a thrift store and an old laptop from a neighbor whose son had upgraded. I started making posters for school clubs, birthday invitations for people at church, and little logos for imaginary businesses. Severe ADHD made some parts of life harder, but design gave my fast brain somewhere to go. It let me see connections other people missed. It made me feel capable. By senior year, I was not the same girl who had arrived on his porch with trash bags. I graduated with good grades, not perfect, but mine. Grandpa wore a suit that was too warm for the weather and clapped louder than anyone when my name was called. My parents did not come. Brandon did not come. My mother did not even send a message. I told myself it did not hurt, but it did. Healing does not mean you stop wanting the people who broke you to suddenly become better. It means you stop building your life around that wish. I went to community college first because it was affordable and close enough that Grandpa could still see me on weekends. Then I transferred to a larger university in Ohio for graphic design and marketing. I worked part-time, applied for scholarships, learned how to budget, and called Grandpa every Sunday night. He taught me how to change a tire, how to compare car insurance, how to read a lease, how to cook something besides microwave noodles, and how to walk away from people who only loved the version of me they could control. After college, I got a job at a boutique marketing agency in Chicago. My first apartment was tiny, loud, and overpriced, but it was mine. I had a window that looked out at another brick building, a desk covered in design drafts, and a fridge with Grandpa's picture on it. For 9 years, my mother stayed gone. She kept posting perfect family memories online, but I was not in them. Sometimes relatives would comment asking about me, and she would give vague answers like, "Maya is doing her own thing," or, "We are giving her space." She never said, "I left my sick 16-year-old daughter in Columbus and let my father raise her." She never said, "I called her crazy," until she believed it. She never said, "I chose my pride over my child." Grandpa told me not to chase an apology from someone who benefited from never giving one, so I built a life without her. I had therapy. I had medication. I had friends who knew my diagnosis and did not use it against me. I had work I was proud of. And I had Grandpa, the only person who had ever looked at all my difficult pieces and decided I was still worth keeping. Then 4 months ago, he passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was old, and part of me knew it was coming, but grief does not care how prepared you think you are. Losing him felt like losing the first home I had ever had. I thought that would be the hardest thing I would face that year. I was wrong. Grandpa left everything to me. His house in Columbus, the one with the leaning mailbox and the porch where my old life had ended, was fully paid off. He also left me a savings account and a small investment account he had built quietly over decades. He had never been flashy with money. He clipped coupons, fixed things instead of replacing them, and drove the same car until the mechanic begged him to stop. I used to tease him about it, and he would say, "I am not cheap, kiddo. I am building choices." In his will, he left me one handwritten note. "Use this to build a life where no one gets to throw you away again." I cried so hard when I read it that the lawyer gave me a box of tissues and pretended to look at his computer so I could have privacy. I did not plan to sell the house right away. I wanted to keep it for a while, maybe stay there some weekends, maybe turn my old room into a little studio. It felt wrong to make big decisions while grief was still sitting on my chest. 4 months after the funeral, on a cold evening in Chicago, someone buzzed my apartment. I was expecting a food delivery, so I answered without thinking. A voice said, "Maya, it is your mother." My whole body went still. I had not heard her voice in years, but it still had the power to pull me backward. I looked through the lobby camera and saw her standing there in a wool coat, hair perfectly styled, face pale and tight. Beside her was Brandon. For 1 second, I did not recognize him. The brother I remembered was broad-shouldered, confident, always surrounded by people who laughed at his jokes. The man standing in my lobby looked exhausted. His cheeks were hollow, his eyes were dull, and his hands kept moving like he could not settle inside his own skin. I should have ignored them. I know that now. But grief makes strange doors inside you swing open. I let them up. When my mother stepped into my apartment, she looked around like she was inspecting whether I had done better than she expected. She gave me a stiff hug I did not return. Brandon could barely meet my eyes. For a few minutes, she pretended this was a family visit. She said she was sorry about Grandpa. She said he had been a complicated man, which was a cruel thing to say about the person who had raised the child she abandoned. Then she sat on my couch, folded her hands in her lap, and finally told the truth about why she was there. Brandon had been injured playing college football. A bad tackle, a torn shoulder, surgery, painkillers, another prescription, then another. By the time anyone admitted there was a problem, it was no longer about pain from the injury. It was opioid addiction. My mother described it like something that had happened to the family, not something Brandon was living through. She said they had tried outpatient care, church counseling, cheaper programs, family supervision, promises, threats, everything. Nothing had worked. Now a doctor had recommended a residential treatment program. A good one, a private one, the kind with medical supervision and long-term support. It cost more than she could pay. I listened quietly, not because I enjoyed seeing Brandon like that. I did not. Addiction is a medical issue too, and I would never pretend otherwise. Looking at him, I saw a person who needed real help, not shame. But I also saw my mother's pattern. When my brain needed help, she called me crazy and put me out. When Brandon's body and brain needed help, she crossed state lines to beg for money. She reached into her purse and pulled out brochures, printed costs, facility names, proof that she had prepared for this conversation like a sales pitch. Then her voice cracked, and she said, "Please, Maya, save your brother." The room went quiet. Years of being called crazy sat between us. The porch in Columbus sat between us. Grandpa's funeral, where she had stood in the back and left early, sat between us. I looked at Brandon first. He looked ashamed, and for a moment I felt sorry for him. Then I looked at my mother and smiled, not because anything was funny, but because the universe had a strange way of handing people the exact words they deserved. "This crazy person does not understand what you are talking about," I said. Her face changed instantly. She knew. She knew exactly what I was throwing back at her. She started crying harder and said this was not the time for old grudges. I told her old grudges were not the issue. The issue was truth. I said I was willing to help Brandon, but not by handing her cash, and not while she continued pretending our family history was some private misunderstanding. I told her I would pay a treatment facility directly if she met one condition. She had to record a video and post it in the family Facebook group. In that video, she had to say she called her daughter crazy for having bipolar disorder and severe ADHD. She had to say she abandoned me at 16 at Grandpa's house. She had to say Grandpa did not steal me or turn me against her. He saved me because she refused to parent me, and she had to apologize to him by name, even if he was no longer alive to hear it. My mother stared at me like I had asked her to set herself on fire. I told her she did not have to mention Brandon's addiction publicly. That was his private medical information. But if she wanted Grandpa's money to help the son she had always chosen, she had to stop lying about what she did to the daughter she threw away. Brandon whispered, "Mom, maybe just do it." She snapped her head toward him like he had betrayed her. Then she turned back to me and said I was being cruel. I said, "No. Cruel is leaving a sick child on a porch and calling it discipline. This is accountability." They left without the money. After that night, my mother became exactly what she used to accuse me of being: unstable, dramatic, and impossible to reason with. She called me 37 times in 2 days. She left voicemails that started with crying and ended with insults. In one message, she said, "I hope you can live with yourself if something happens to your brother." In another, she said Grandpa would be ashamed of me. That was the one that almost made me answer, because the idea of her using him against me made my hands shake with anger. But I did not call back. Instead, I saved every message. Therapy had taught me that when someone tries to rewrite reality, documentation is peace. Then came the photos. She sent pictures of Brandon looking sick, tired, and humiliated. I hated that she used him that way. Whatever resentment I had from childhood, I did not want my brother turned into a weapon. I texted her one time only. I said, "I will still pay the treatment facility directly if you post the truth and apologize publicly. Do not send me another picture of him. He is a person, not a bargaining chip." She replied within seconds, "You are selfish. You are heartless. You were always broken." That was when I blocked her number. She started emailing me. I blocked that too. Then she used relatives. My Aunt Carol messaged me first, saying my mother had told everyone I was refusing to help Brandon because I hated the family. She said she did not want to get involved, but hoped I would do the right thing. For a long time, I stared at that message and felt 16 again, standing on Grandpa's porch, while adults decided what kind of person I was without asking me. Then I decided I was done letting my mother own the story. I wrote one message to the family group. I did not curse. I did not exaggerate. I said that when I was 16, after a mental health episode at school, my mother packed my belongings and left me at Grandpa's house in Columbus. I said Grandpa became my guardian, found me psychiatric care, helped me stay in school, and raised me when my parents chose not to. I said I was willing to help Brandon by paying a legitimate residential treatment center directly, but only if my mother publicly acknowledged what she had done and apologized for lying about it for years. Then I attached one photo. It was not of Brandon. It was a picture of me and Grandpa at my high school graduation, his arm around my shoulders, both of us smiling like we had survived something together. The group went silent for almost an hour. Then Aunt Carol replied, "I remember your grandfather trying to tell us something was wrong back then. We should have listened." Another cousin wrote that my mother had always said I chose to leave because I was impossible to control. Someone else said, "Denise, is this true?" My mother left the group chat. That was her answer. The perfect mother image she had protected for years cracked in front of everyone she had tried to impress. After that, the begging got uglier. Twice, she drove from Ohio to Chicago and showed up outside my building. The first time, the doorman called me because she was crying in the lobby. I told him not to let her up. The second time, she brought Brandon, and that broke my heart in a different way. He stood behind her like a ghost while she demanded I come downstairs. I called building security and texted Brandon one sentence before blocking the new number he had used. "I hope you get help, but I will not let her use you to hurt me again." A week later, I moved. My friend Nina helped me carry boxes into a smaller apartment in a different neighborhood. I told every relative I trusted that my address was private and that anyone who gave it to my mother would lose access to me too. That may sound harsh to people who grew up in healthy families, but boundaries sound cruel only to people who benefited from you not having any. My mother never posted the video. She never apologized. From what I heard through relatives, she had to sell her SUV and borrow money to get Brandon into a more affordable program. I genuinely hope he stayed. I hope he found doctors who treated his addiction like the medical issue it is, not a shameful family secret. But I also know this. My mother had a chance to help her son by telling the truth about her daughter, and she chose her pride. That was the real ending. Not me smiling at her pain. Not me celebrating my brother's suffering. The revenge was watching the woman who called me crazy finally be exposed as the one who had built her whole life around a lie. I kept Grandpa's house. I kept the savings. I used part of it for therapy, part of it for an emergency fund, and part of it to build a small design studio in the Columbus house, the same place where my mother thought she was dumping a problem. Sometimes I sit on that porch with coffee and think about the girl who cried there with trash bags at her feet. I wish I could tell her that one day, that porch would not be the place her family ended. It would be the place her real life began. What I learned is this: family is not just blood. Family is the person who stays, learns, listens, and helps you carry what is heavy without turning it into an insult. Mental health struggles do not make someone unworthy of love, and medical issues should never be used as a nickname, a joke, or a weapon. Forgiveness is not something people get to demand because they suddenly need you. Respect, accountability, and truth have to come first. So if you have ever been called difficult, broken, dramatic, or crazy by people who refuse to understand what you are carrying, please hear me. You are not the worst thing someone said about you. You are allowed to heal. You are allowed to protect your peace. And you are allowed to build a life so strong that when the people who abandoned you come back asking for rescue, you can decide whether helping them would be kindness or just another way to betray yourself. So tell me honestly, if you were in my place, would you have paid for Brandon's treatment without the apology? Or would you have made my mother tell the truth first?